winning an election, that's just the first stage.
No one single party is going to command parliamentary majority outright.
Not everyone is going to be on the winning side.
We want performance. We want results.
Smaller splinter parties tend not to do very well. And you see this historically, that it will tend towards the large blocs.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I'm Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Juliana Jalaluddin. So, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about on Malaysia's political landscape that is shifting rapidly, with new political movements emerging, tensions growing within parties, and voters rethinking who they want to support.
Indeed. And the real question here is whether political power is still determined solely by electoral majorities or increasingly by the ability to negotiate, build and sustain post-election coalitions. Now, I think a lot of us have been following the developments thus far, especially with what happens within the Pakatan Harapan coalition, right? I think the last week alone, we saw figures such as Rafizi, Ramli having to, push or highlight the internal debates perhaps that has been happening within the coalition itself. And then him and Nik Nazmi having to introduce their new party in the form of Bersama.
Taking over
Bersama and MUP. That's the thing. It's interesting that we insist on the move to take over, right? Because a lot of people might not necessarily understand that Bersama, existed or
Since 2016.
Since 2016,
But they've been dormant for quite a while, then suddenly made a name recently, which is
Exactly.
quite interesting. Thinking, now we got to think, and it got us thinking as well as journalists. So Bersama isn't the only party that's like this. There are other parties before, but some had failed, some had become dormant, and then some had become very successful, like Bersatu.
But then, successful like Bersatu now, today, at
Is
this
it
hour.
successful in terms of they have more
Traction,
visibility
I
and
suppose,
traction.
yes. And we kind of understand the constitution better than if you compare to Bersama, right? But anyway, going back to having to highlight internal debates that happens within the coalition, I think for voters, or at least the public as it is at the moment, it's very interesting to see the trajectory of Malaysia's political landscape. Why so? Because the tensions today actually reflect how difficult it is for us to balance reform ambition and the consideration of our coalition members here. Because everybody needs to have a say. Everybody needs to be represented. And compromise here, apparently, is just no longer just political strategy, but a way for us to, craft better structures here. Well, on the opposition side, Julie, maybe you can highlight what you've observed thus far that's problematic.
So on the opposition side, right, we can see that attention has increasingly turned to Bersatu. And that has been quite obvious. And then questions about its leadership direction as well within Perikatan Nasional. So much of the focus, of course, remains on Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin and Datuk Sri Hamzah Zainuddin, right? And now how both leaders are shaping the coalition's future. But beyond personalities, there are also growing questions about unity, leadership succession, and whether the opposition can stay cohesive moving forward. So because of the challenge for the opposition now, it's not just taking on the government. It's also keeping its own coalition together. That is the main challenge.
And I'd like to just add why we are emphasizing on the opposition bloc itself, because we require a strong opposition sort of, bantering, because that's what democracy is all about, right?
Yes.
So it's not just about the present administration of the day. You have to also consider what's happening with our, I suppose, strongest opposition to date in that sense, I suppose.
So we're going to dive deep into this topic. We need to discuss with further details and understand this better. We have a couple of political analysts, quite prominent political analysts here in the studio with us. We have
not political, but they are not political in that sense, but they do observe political rhetorics and understand how the way work.
Exactly.
Things work.
So we have Dr. Tricia Yeoh. Welcome to the studio again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And we have Dr. Oh Eisen.
Oh, nice to share some of my views with all of you.
Fantastic. This is going to be interesting. So,
So, to the both of you, of course, before we get into whether or not Malaysian voters today are becoming more willingly to follow personalities in their voting sort of considerations here. I do understand traditional this first, like traditional party structures in Malaysia often do take over the headlines, right? And then in recent years, we have seen a gradual erosion when it comes to fixed voting patterns or the volatility in terms of how we support certain parties' legacy or messaging. Before we go into the question of like whether or not Malaysian voters follow personality politics or like is it party politics, let's understand why Malaysia's political landscape is this diverse today first. Is it because we're so, how do I say, tired of what's been thrown like 50 years ago, 20 years ago? No.
So what we are seeing in Malaysia today is really is a fragmentation followed by a very, very long period of dominant party politics. So Malaysia up to 2018 was led by one of the world's longest serving single party dominant regimes in the form of Barisan Nasional or UMNO. You know, it's interchangeable in that sense because UMNO was is the primary party of that bloc. And, you know, when you have a party that is so dominant for so long, like in many other countries, like in Japan, like in Mexico, where you have these dominant parties eventually falling, it's really so dependent on the structure of the political party system and, of course, the electorate itself as to what happens after that. So we're living through that moment. I mean, I think the question was always, how long can UMNO and BN last? It lasted till 2018. So what we're living through now is that post-dominant period.
But we're still trying to find our footing.
We are still trying to find our footing. We knew that system could not last forever, right? And in fact, many were very deeply opposed to it for many reasons, right? If you recall what happened during that time, you know, it's always not good when you have a party that is in power for too long. What happens after that? So I would argue that we are still going through this period of democratic consolidation. So that's what we call it in political science. Whether it's heading towards a period of better democracy or not, this is the period where we as voters, as society, will determine what that trajectory will look like. So that's why the fragmentation is happening at such a rapid rate, actually, right? Because you have more and more parties splintering out of more and more parties. And I'll say one more thing before we get into the nitty-gritty. I think one way to reflect on where the trajectory goes through will be highly dependent on the political party system. So what party system do we have? We practice, number one is a Westminster electoral system, parliamentary system. Number two, we have a first-past-the-post electoral system. So when you have first past the post, meaning it's a very simple majority that's needed to win, it's actually our electoral system is very simplistic in that sense, compared to other countries that have adopted more complex systems. What that means is that smaller splinter parties tend not to do very well. And you see this historically, that it will tend towards the large blocs. So over time, voting patterns will tend towards like 2 large blocs, 2 or 3 maybe, large blocs. And these smaller parties actually don't do very well. If we had a different system, such as the proportional representation system, PR, which some people are, you know, advocating for in this country, some agree, some disagree, that's when you could see some smaller splinter parties doing well. But in the absence of that, I think, and we're going to explore that today, like what happens when you do have small parties and none of them are actually dominant in nature.
So yes, before we go into the nitty-gritty, Isan, I think I want to get your take as well in terms of why have we come to a point whereby we're just okay to pivot sometimes overnight. Is it because we're so lax when it comes to having to see real reforms being pushed?
Well, when we were a one-party state essentially before 2018, it's not only one party, it's basically like a one leader state with a very powerful prime minister. Dr. Mahathir certainly came to mind when I grew up, he could jail people by means of ISA. And then gradually that it's more relaxed. And then, of course, with 2018, you have the change of government. So when it was a one-party state, you see, we are very hierarchical, almost Leninist type of parties, with party president or chairman or secretary general, and then you have the deputy president, vice president, central committee members, and so on.
right.
I guess we are only lacking a politburo for all these parties. Previously, it was very difficult for any political wannabe in a typical party, whether it's in government or sometimes even the opposition, to try to sort of resist the senior leadership and try to make a name for themselves. I mean, all these shall we say, middle-ranking political political leaders. But of course, after 2018, well, first of all, you don't have ISA, you don't have all these very draconian laws. Even Dr. Mahathir mellowed down quite a lot after 2018, right? So no more of this arbitrary jailing, arbitrary sort of finishing your political career and so on. So therefore, people want to be their own bosses. So you have political leaders with political ambitions. And for them, what is a political party? It's a vehicle. So that's why you see a lot of this, shall we say, ambitious political figures coming out to form their various, splinter parties, small parties, and so on. Yeah.
But what's the end goal with that, right? Because generally, I do want to understand this. Is it because, okay, whatever the political aspirations of each and every leaders need, it's only they will be able to understand it completely, 100%. But when they speak to the larger public, right, a lot of us only want one thing. We want performance. We want results. In a sense, what is being promised can be materialized. Not, sometimes it can't be 100%. I do understand because it has to go through a whole debate and through parliament, and you have to, it's democracy at the end of the day. But then, like even simple things, like I think in the past, what we've been trying to push for was the prime ministerial term, right? Having to limit itself to just 10 years. They are promising that it's going to be discussed in the next sitting. But again, it was discussed even before the previous sitting. It's like, we're going to see this being realized. It will, so that those kind of delays, demotivates the voters here. Because again, I just want to understand in terms of the voters, do you think they're being more transactional today because they just jump from one ship to another because there's no leader that can actually drive change or drive the reforms that they want?
Well, some voters are transactional. They would like to see reforms, for example, being enacted, and therefore they would tend to support those leaders they perceive as being able to deliver these reforms. But you see, even the term reform would come in several shades. Some are more progressive reforms. Some could be more regressive reforms. There are voters who would like to see this country becoming more liberal and dare I say secular. There are also voters who would like to see this country becoming more, let's say, conservative and, shall I say, more religiously oriented. So it depends. And sometimes they would go with certain parties or certain absent of a party being able to deliver that with political personalities whom they perceive as being able to better their move towards those goals. Yeah.
Speaking of voter loyalty to certain segments in the country, so we obviously can see voter loyalty in East Malaysia is different than in the Peninsula. East Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, it's probably because of they're familiar already with the certain public figures there, so they follow figures and the resources they have in Sabah, Sarawak. Whereas in Peninsula, the demographic of loyalty is different, not just towards the party, but there are voters who are loyal to certain personalities. So take for example, when Rafizi and Nik Nazmi made the announcement on Bersama, we could still hear people cheering up quite loud during that live telecast. So I think that could safely say that they have a large following, right? And UMNO, when they reported thousands of members being registered, consisting of new ones and those who return, who have been pardoned, who have been, those who've been sacked and returned to the party. And especially when they, allow sacked members and suspended members back into the party, there are followers of these political figures.
Therefore, yeah.
Exactly. So how do you
Right on the
see
same
these
wave,
segments of voter loyalty?
Well, number one, in Sabah, it's very, shall we say, material resources oriented, especially the more rural, more remote constituencies. He or she, or his or her party, or their party could probably make inroad. But I think nowadays, because we have this fragmented political landscape, the idea is for you and perhaps your handful of party colleagues to win as many seats as possible, because it's very likely that no one single party is going to command a parliamentary majority outright,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
necessitates coalition building and so on. So if I have 5 seats, I'm almost guarantee a cabinet post, right? And as party president, I will be the one who is the minister, plus my deputy may be the deputy minister, for example. So the idea is to win as many seats as possible, even though it's just a handful or 2 handfuls. Then you get a seat at the coalition table. Yeah.
Tricia, just want to get to you because since we're already talking about East Malaysia politics here, right? How do you think it's important when it comes to the parties in East Malaysia to kind of band together to show that they are actually the power brokers that can, support coalition building, especially on the federal level? Because when we talk about these two nuances, it's always separate. But actually, when we when we go into parliament, when we want to push for things, it's one unit, federal level. So,
I'm pretty certain that the political parties and coalitions in Sabah and Sarawak know well and true already that they are certainly the kingmakers. This has already been established in the last recent elections, where the support of Sarawak and Sabah are just too important to ignore. In fact, a lot of flights will take place where the coalition leaders in Peninsula will want to persuade, in fact, to ensure that you have the security and the support of Sarawak and Sabah in order to be able to form the federal government. So I think this is also why you've seen in recent years, and I know this is not the specific topic for it, but it's related, where both Sarawak and Sabah on policy-related issues have been able to secure a lot more of their demands on that front. Because they know full well that precisely these are the times where it's a bargaining power that is on their side to be able to warrant that. If not for that security and those numbers of parliamentary seats, then a federal government could not therefore be formed.
Yeah, they're no longer the side players.
That's right. But I wanted to go back a bit to the discussion along, are voters in Malaysia party-oriented or are they personality-oriented? So I think it's a very simple equation, actually. I mean, you think about it, voters, not that, complicated. If the party is strong, if you have a strong party, then voters would gravitate towards that party. If the party is weak, that's when personalities can really shine through and voters will gravitate towards those personalities. So very interesting. So I did a bit of a research in the last election, in the 2022 election, where because of the fragmentation, a lot of the individual politicians actually, many of those who let's say they jumped ship, right? So they had changed allegiances already. They actually preferred to campaign based on their own names. And they found, some specific individual, I'm not going to name who, of course, but they found that it would benefit them better to campaign on their own service record, on their constituency work, on their name. So they would print like these, record like leaflets, or these are all the things that I have done, and they would minimize the role of highlighting the party. So that I found really interesting, right? I mean, looking in a system like Malaysia, which was so party dependent. I mean, in the past, you would say like, anyone contesting under UMNO, right? And anyone contesting under PH, I mean, this is during the time, depending on which election you talk about, anyone contesting under PAS, like the party wins The second thing I'll say about this party versus personality thing is that I think it also depends on the type of voter and the type of constituent you're trying to attract. So a more conservative voter, I believe, would gravitate more towards the party because the party has legacy, has tradition. You know what the ideals stand for. You know everything about its past, its record. Whereas I would say that maybe the less conservative, maybe more reform-minded would be more open to looking at individuals because they would check on certain individuals' record, the individuals who may or may not adhere to certain party lines. So I think it really depends on the type of voter demographic you're looking at as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So thanks for laying it out there for us as well, because I think it's an extension to why I also mentioned, because I do want to understand, do we gravitate towards more towards leaders, good leaders that can actually drive the policies that they promise? That's one of the reasons why we vote them in the first place, because as you mentioned, some candidates campaign based on their name and what they've done. So we want the same sort of I suppose realities, but it doesn't happen at the end of the day, because a lot of people like to look at voters to be like sheeps, but some, or maybe 80%, when they go out to vote, they actually vote. They properly vote. I don't know. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Do they just vote just for the sake of voting? I don't think so.
I mean, this one, I guess you need a lot of research to determine how do voters make up their mind, right? And that's a research topic.
Altogether, another one altogether.
But on the surface, generally, on your general observation, would you say that post-2018 election, post-2018 voters are becoming less ideological, but rather more pragmatic, because a lot of political figures are becoming more pragmatic themselves?
I would think, indeed, those in a progressive or reformist camp would tend to behave like that. They try to look for leaders whom they perceive to be, more reformist-minded and in action. On the other hand, you still have a lot of very loyal past supporters and UMNO supporters and the like. I think it's very interesting. You look at, let's say, PAS or even UMNO, whoever is the president of PAS or UMNO, these two parties are still quite prominent in their supporters' mind, for example. And I think DAP, in a sense, is also moving towards that direction. DAP is still a very shiny name for the non-Malays. But if you look at PKR, that's interesting. Imagine a PKR without Anwar and his clan. Would you think there would still be a PKR worth supporting, that people will still go and support PKR?
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, and let's be blunt about it, since I'm from Sabah, a Warisan without Shafi, a Gagasan without Hajiji. But in Sarawak, it's different. You look at this PBB, which is the main party in the ruling coalition. Even if it is not Abang Joe, I think it's still a very shiny political name and so on. So whether a political party has made, I wouldn't say quantum leap, but a slow progression towards, having its own party name being very established and so on, I think that I think it's what politicians were to work towards.
But on the question of party survivability, then actually it really does not depend on the personality, right? It should be dependent on the party's own. I mean, logically. Okay. Since we've also talked about a lot of the discussions so far, or not just on the set, but outside, it's usually pre-elections or leading up to elections, but no one talks about once elections done, and then you have to maintain the coalition dynamics afterwards, because what transpire after elections is usually what sets the tone for the next one. For instance, we want to question about the idea of whether or not a reform can actually survive when you're already inside the government, because compromise between different parties is something unavoidable, right? We go with maybe Tricia, because
Sure.
And then get your reaction. So, do you think, in the context of having to ensure that reform survives post-election, because compromise between different parties is unavoidable, do you think the personality aspect needs to dumb down a little bit?
Okay.
Like, okay, for instance, I just give an example, but not to accuse or say anything. But let's say, okay, if Rafizi contests like to the death, and then he wins, and then all his reforms and promises, having to follow him until he can be part of the big. Let's say a majority government lah. How should he compromise? Because isn't it like back to square one then?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing tricky about election manifestos is that once you come into a coalition, so if you contest separately, you create a manifesto separately. In the case of this Madani administration, there is no common manifesto for the voters to hold them accountable to.
Yep.
So that's the frustrating thing, right? That, I think at the bare minimum, voters or, indeed policy people like us should have called for them to make a statement as to what is the, because PH has its manifesto, BN has its separate manifesto, but when you come together as a coalition, what are you committing to?
Right.
Yeah.
So there was none of that. So I do hope in the future, like when the next election comes, which we are talking about as well, snap polls might take place this year. The accountability part is really important. Like, what are you going to be governing on the basis of? Right. So I think going back to your question, I mean, I think for sure compromise has had to take place. Let's just talk about this administration, because there were many things in the PH manifesto, the one that was separately, put together, that have not emerged in not even the current term. Yes, research has been done. I mean, there's a separation of the AG and PP. I know that's on the way. The Political Financing Act. Many things were actually included there, either because it was not possible, there was no political real, leadership from the top driving it forward. But and to be honest, I think sometimes we use the term compromise too easily, meaning to say that who is actually not wanting it. One party might feel like the other one doesn't want it. Actually, this party feels that the other one doesn't want it. So it is also a very convenient scapegoat to just say that, oh, I'm in, this coalition with other parties, therefore I need to listen to their views. That is true, but are we bending over backwards just a little bit too much, right? So that balance needs to be struck, and this is why it's important to not just have the coalitions in place, but a lot of other stakeholders around which provide that countervailing pressure.
So it looks like winning an election is not enough. It's not just about winning, because after they win, let's say, for example, we give an example of Rafizi, right? Because that's the easiest example that we can throw out there. Even if he wins, right, the real battle will be after that. Who can build post-election numbers?
It's not just build, but sustain in whatever numbers they get. Like
who would be acceptable as coalition partner? So it looks like post-2018 general election, what has become of the Malaysian political landscape is that winning an election, that's just the first stage.
Sure.
The real challenge, the real hard work would be after you've won the election, you have to figure out who are you willing to
put in the cabinet also.
Collaborate with.
That's
Yeah.
like,
I mean,
honestly,
coming back to Rafizi and trying to think through this process of like, what was the straw that brought the camel's back for him? Because obviously he was in government, he was in cabinet before. He's part of those discussions as well. I mean, to be frank, many reforms he would have had to compromise on as well, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, it was the party elections that actually started this whole process.
and we know how and what transpired.
Sure,
lah.
yeah, I mean, a year ago, and we
Yeah.
know that was the starting point of, at least publicly and visibly, the breakdown of the relationship between him and Prime Minister Anwar. And I think this year what has happened is all of the issues embroiled around MACC, right, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. We won't go into the details of that. You can research that yourself. But I mean, I'm also trying to explore for the future, like, what is the line? What is the red line that A, reform-minded politicians, or B, reform-minded voters like us are not willing to cross?
Right.
So there are some reforms that maybe, okay, we understand it takes time because, it's not just the political parties, by the way, it's the civil service, it's the entire bureaucracy that you need to convince. You need to tell them, why is it important to have a Political Financing Act? Why is it not detrimental to them? Why is the Freedom of Information Act not going to be, jeopardizing their jobs? So there are genuine fears there which take time to resolve. But I mean, if I were to ask myself the question, I think my line would be something along the lines of the rule of law, where, you know, under the law, under the rule of law, everyone is supposed to be treated equally under the law.
Right.
And when there are obvious, you know, infringements on that particular principle, then that's perhaps where reform-minded people have to wake up and say, okay, is this coalition worth it? Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone.
Sorry, we left you a little bit there in the dark.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, it's,
Go ahead.
no, it's interesting to understand this as well. But yeah, how can reform sustain?
Well, because we still live in a, shall we say, a developing country, so very often the livelihood matters, right? And that's why cash and various handouts would figure very prominently in the elections, because that's one period of time whereby you can get something for free in exchange for your votes, and I will be very blunt about it, right? So you can see, despite our aspirations to become developed country and so on, we are still very much very backward, to be blunt about it, and as long as this sort of socio-economic condition persist, you would have politics which is very much tainted by corruption, collusion, and the like. And even if you were reformist before, once you go into power, with all the temptations of the business persons coming to you, trying to get projects in return for some kickbacks and so on, it's very tempting. I mean, I witnessed political friends who have fallen into those temptations and traps.
The systemic
and
issues
so on.
basically.
And even in my home state, I have seen such reformist figures and so on. And then they then openly vouch for a very corrupt government, and you feel the sense of helplessness, and so when you see a figure like Rafizi, again you pin your hope to him, to Nick Nazmi, and you can only hope for the best, that they wouldn't get themselves corrupted in the future.
So that my follow-up question to that would be that could I suppose parties such as this, or movements such as this, because we always talk about Rafizi and Nick Nazmi, but we also have Hamza. Don't forget about Hamza, guys, because he's also setting his own reset movement. Ideally, on paper, it looks great because he's also trying to democratize, Perikatan Nasional's internal politics there. But in terms of these sort of figures, right? Do you think they can attract enough disillusioned progressive voters to fall into their, I suppose, under their umbrella, basically, and then they'll figure out, who knows, probably Bersama will work together with, I don't know if Hamza contests with Reset, I'm not too sure. Like, just to have that, like, the movement against the institution, because we know what's happening within the two blocs here.
Well, I mean, I think if you do a count, right, of actual political parties that are out in the playing field, that are trying to attract the very similar Malay Muslim voter, okay, so you've got like 6 of them out there, maybe 7 if you want to count Muda. You have UMNO, you have Bersatu, which is the breakout of UMNO, Reset, which is the breakout of Bersatu, and then you have PKR, and then now Bersama, which is the breakout of PKR, and then Muda, okay, and then you have PAS, right? So if you have these 6 parties that are sort of trying to target slightly more inclusive, maybe progressive type Malay Muslim electorate, that will definitely dilute the vote, where you have the vote splitting taking place. Yep. And on the other hand, you have PAS. So I do see PAS emerging as the winner. I mean, PAS already, you could argue they are already the winner, because they are the largest party in parliament. Yes. We have to remember that. Yeah. And they are going to push for even more inroads. You have some seats that are not even safe, I would say, in the state of Selangor, the most highly urbanized state, the crown jewel of the peninsula, in Penang as well, across the Seberang Perai area. So these are seats, similar to the seat that Nurul Izzah lost in the last election. In the state of Selangor, you have state seats which used to belong to UMNO, all of which were taken by PAS. Some of the even more central areas, you would actually see maybe Selangor, the state itself, the entire state won't flip, but you will see more states and more percentage of the votes going to PAS for various reasons, but one of which is what we're talking about today, which is the splintering of parties and the diluting of the reform-minded votes.
So is it no longer a need to kind of like win big, but just win small within your locality, and then
if you can win at all,
Well, the important thing, as I said, is for you, the party president himself or herself, to win a seat, and then let's say a handful of your party colleagues to also win. Then you're guaranteed one cabinet seat and one deputy minister already. So, but if you are a part of a larger party, even if you still win your own seat, you might only be a deputy minister. That's why you need to come out and have your own party.
But even then, even if you're influential enough for this to be, I suppose, be part of the negotiating table for this whole discussion of having to build together as a coalition, that's good enough. You don't need high positions. I mean, yes, traditionally we would think that is the way to go, but even existingly or in the past cabinet or we see a lot of the performing ministers are not even the top. I mean, that's just my own opinion. The top leading positions, right?
Careful on
yeah. No, I mean, just to kind of again be blunt and just objectively speaking here.
But it's interesting that you point out the part about smaller parties, splinter parties. Do they have to win and whatnot? What will be the impact after they win? How will they survive? Because it's this drama, this scenario has happened since after the Sheraton move. We are seeing, politicians willing to cooperate with former enemies to, if power requires it, to form a coalition. Right?
Yeah, so I go back to the first thing I said at the very beginning, which is that I think if we become more and more comfortable with this notion of coalition governments being formed after election, like the way Germany, has and many countries, then we should normalize the formation of confidence and supply agreements, like CSAs. The best one of which we saw under the watch of Prime Minister Ismail Sabri, because that was the start of actually having a lot of, Undi 18 was part of that CSA, which happened. And I think we should actually be replicating more and more of that, not just at the federal level, at the state level as well. So don't forget that a lot is happening at the state level too, right? I mean, you have 2, potentially 3 state elections taking place this year, Johor, Malacca, and then maybe Negeri Sembilan. And if you have a situation where it's sort of like a hung, I mean, you probably won't see that in Malacca or Johor, where UMNO is going to win big. But in Negeri Sembilan, you will probably have this kind of arrangement. So yeah, have a CSA there. And what I would like to see, and I don't know if this is realistic enough, but many are trying to argue for equal constituency development funds, which are not just part of the CSA, but are also part of the law. So if you can legalize something at the state level, this really changes the political landscape so that you don't gamble everything to win all, meaning that it's not just winner wins all, loser loses all situation. And that actually improves the political maturity, and it goes back to a little bit of what Dr. Oisan was saying about cash politics. I mean, we understand that's still happening very much. It's very rampant in Malaysia. And why is that? Because politics is expensive to run.
Right.
Parties are expensive, constituencies are expensive, the economy isn't doing well. Of course, there's going to be lots of people begging you. And who do they go to? They go to their MPs, right? And they go to their parties because who else do they know in positions of leadership? So if there is more equitability on the distribution of resources, that's when you can see I would argue less of this type of political corruption.
Understood. We have about like 5 to 7 minutes left, but 2 questions in terms of that we haven't, the areas that we haven't go into yet. The need for our opposition to be strong as well, to be also one of the backbones for democracy of our nation, kan? And then the last one is like moving forwards towards GA16. How can we ensure that all this split voting and everything does not phase the voters? leave the voters feeling fatigued in that sense, and then eventually that they don't turn out, and there's gonna be another issue, right? Then meaning to say indirectly they don't trust the systems at B.
Yep.
First area of concern in terms of having to ensure the opposition is a strong backbone for the nation as well. How important is it when it comes to allowing the opposition to also shadow the present administration aggressively? Because we don't see that even in day one, right? You talk about it in the beginning, you have a shadow cabinet, but there's no, I mean, even during the Q&A rounds or whatever, there's no like bantering of sorts, right?
Well, yeah, perhaps we could have a more formalized shadow government sort of system like the United Kingdom, with not only a leader of the oppositions, but also with the various ministries. They have, shall we say, opposition counterparts as what they call, I think, spokesperson or something, but essentially it's a shadow minister, shadow secretary. But of course, all this also requires, shall we say, parliamentarians to be more policy oriented. I think, again, because of our socio-economic conditions, a lot of parliamentarians, they're extremely hardworking. I mean, we should not deny that. But the focus of their work is indeed to serve their constituents' needs, right? Various needs from getting married to getting buried and so on. So there's very little time for all these policy works. Imagine you have a ministry such as health, such as defense, and so on, and the opposition will have to have a counterpart figure. Well, they need to do
Same number of
research,
resources,
and
yes, true.
well, there has to be money be appropriated for them to hire research assistants and so on, above and beyond their constituency work. So I think it's a very good idea, just that you need more money for that, and
I was
now
just saying,
money
so
is
it's a
crunch.
budget issue
Yeah.
basically for us to run an equitable sort of like.
Yeah, I mean, parliamentary researchers
Yeah.
need more funding. Political parties need institutional funding, I would argue, so that they become less reliant on corporate money. And that's where, again, I emphasize this whole political corruption. But I think at a time when there is austerity, it's very difficult to make an argument about increasing allocation of budget. But I would still say, despite difficult times economically, if you strengthen your political system, then you can actually increase trust in the system, which goes a long way when governments want to do anything.
Right.
So there's always good incentive to strengthen the political party system. But there's a lot of disillusionment as well right now, and I understand what voters will say. What, you want to give the parties more money, but this is the type of argument that needs to come across, that if you strengthen the party, you strengthen the party system, you have less corruption,
Yeah.
and corruption is what erodes everything.
Trust and
Yeah.
Particularly at this moment, money is such a sensitive topic
okay.
from every layer of society.
Yeah, but okay, then again we go to our closing, right? So if both sides are genuinely having to struggle maintaining its not integrity lah, because you got to give it to the to each of the parties, I mean the members within it lah, in terms of how to maintain certain standards, and but it does create a volatile sort of landscape for anyone to even participate in. I mean, I'm not talking about voters at the moment, just talking about like any politician, right? So if they want to even steer themselves, how do I maneuver this? Because even if I'm comfortable within my own party, I know that at the end of the day, reality, we can't even win a simple majority. No one can actually win a simple majority at the end of the day. So sometimes you just have to step outside of that comfort zone a little bit, right? And then having to also realize that there is this sort of volatile sort of area that, at the end of the day, even if you have good intentions, but that intention might turn on you if, results are not met, promises are not made.
Yep.
So do you think, in a sense, both coalitions should be able to identify their structural pressures even before going into the elections, having to call up on the voters to vote for them first, having to address it first? Because we talked about having to have that manifesto intact, right?
Yeah.
And not only later come back and circle on what to agree upon. First, address the pressures. Go into elections transparently. And then we'll be able, because then the voters will understand, okay, why this party would need to work together with party, because at the end of the day, it's about nation building.
I think voters will appreciate transparency, and that increases trust. I think one thing that people were very upset about in the last election was when both PKR and UMNO were very vehemently denying that they were ever planning to come into a coalition together. And then after that, it happened, right? Like it just, it happened really quickly. So I think that is the type of transparency that voters need. And voters can be convinced, especially now when there is no clear, simple majority. I mean, let's not delude ourselves, right? That there is no strong party out there, maybe except PAS. There isn't a strong party out there, and don't feel like you can actually go aggressively into the election, being too gung-ho, trying to outsell yourself. I think we have gone past that stage.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I agree that, setting the voters' expectations of what a likely post-election
Climate would
look like would be ideal. And being very frank about the realities of what might need to happen, that compromise is actually okay, but the compromise has to happen on grounds that voters agree with.
Yeah.
So it has to be, I would still push for something that's policy oriented, that is actually going to be beneficial for the rakyat. Yeah. So don't make the compromise purely about, okay, this party gets this number of seats, therefore this number of cabinet positions, although we know the reality at the behind of the scenes, that is the compromise that usually happens, right? But what can we compromise on that's actually healthy for the nation?
And I suppose we're not also just talking about representation here. Like, we're just talking about work. Because when you mention, because eventually this person gets this particular position in the cabinet, and then it's like, okay, that's a whole different argument.
Yeah, and so, one more thing before I forget, sorry, we should go to Dr. O as well. This knowledge that not everyone is going to be on the winning side, this should guide all parties. Because why? Because the knowledge that you can always be the loser come the next election at the state level or at the general level should drive you to want to do things more fairly and equitably, right? Because you know that this is not going to be a forever situation. You're not going to be prime minister forever. You're not going to be in the federal government position forever to be able to hold control of the entire country's budget. So wouldn't you want to be in a position that if you become the loser, the winner doesn't recall all your past mistakes and I want to punish you for what you did when you were in power. So in that sense, what I'm trying to say is that it's time to talk about healthy political competition. I mean, imagine if you were in school and you're competing to be class monitor, right? What kind of tactics do you use to become class monitor or the president of whatever society in school? Yes, it's competition, but it's not unhealthy. You're not going to bribe people to vote for you. Likewise, in a country, we want to see us moving in the direction where it's okay to lose, right? And you don't lose everything. So that's why it goes back to what kind of incentives are you also going to give to losers?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even the platform, right? Like
like a platform.
Yeah. Okay. So Ihsan, if voter fatigue continues, who stand to gain politically?
Well, because we are supposedly an electoral democracy, so ultimately, supposedly, it's the voters who decide, whom they want to elect, and so on. So, there's this thing about politicians and political parties driving the agenda of a country. That I think is, of course, true to a big extent. But it's also the people, what we want as a people, or in this very multi-racial, multicultural society, what each cohorts or segments of society would like to see. And of course, nowadays you see even beyond the political arena, you see the people of this country, we desire many different things. Some would like to be more conservative, some like it to be more liberal. How we could accommodate each other, I think that ultimately would determine the political landscape of this country and this society. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose, I mean, to be fair, if you just look at what's transpiring in your daily lives, especially, I think if you go online, you would understand lah the nuances, right? But then if you take yourself outside and then you just like, I suppose, mingle around and everything.
Yeah.
Everybody wants the same thing. I think it's just better livability, better, I suppose, economic positioning, especially when it comes to having to ensure that not just themselves,
Yeah.
but like the community at large is able to thrive and not
Yeah.
be depressed even further.
So basically, what general public wants, including I would want, that the reform that was promised by these coalition parties are not being compromised, because it's no longer about PH defeating PN anymore.
Yeah. No, even those reforms should, regardless of whoever wins, should be carried forward.
Yeah.
I think, because there are a lot of things there. Because we also touch about the political financing aspirations there, right? Or I mean, not aspirations lah, but guidelines of sorts. So yeah, I mean, these are real reforms that needs to take place to ensure that we live democratically, accurate to the policy lah, or what the ideal is all about. Right?
I just want to pick up on, and I don't know how much time we have, something that Dr. O said towards the end. I do believe that while most Malaysians want the same things in terms of a good standard of living,
Yep.
good education, good healthcare, good economy, progress, right? There are things that we have not yet grappled with as a society, which we need to be able to actually have a frank discussion about. So it would be, segments of society that actually do want a more, let's say, more conservative elements at the public policy level, meaning that it's fine to have, so faith is usually private, right? So if there is a segment of society that wants religion to be brought much more into public life, into public policy, that's something that I don't think we have really had that frank discussion over.
I think we don't have that frank discussion over because I think a lot of people are like gatekeeping in terms of how they would present it, because we live in a society that's very,
Touchy.
yeah, sensitive in that sense. Multicultural is one thing, but because you do see other localities having to practice the interfaith sort of discussion better, right?
And
than us.
I would like to actually stick my neck out and say that we can have
Yes.
a very decent conversation around religion that is not going to be too sensitive or controversial. I mean, I would like to believe that we are able to do that, and you can facilitate conversations in ways that are not going to anger anyone.
Right.
Mature enough to argue
but
healthily,
sweeping
yeah.
it under the carpet is
Yes, not a way
is
for
also
it lah.
unhealthy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Understood.
Yeah.
This
Right.
is just like a perfect example. When you deal with children throwing tantrum, you don't shut them out.
Yeah.
You hear what they are frustrated about, and then you have a healthy conversation once everything has settled down.
Right.
Right?
It's nice that we are ending it on this particular note lah, because we're also ending it on this particular note because lah, I'm sure. Okay, anyway. So going back to the discussion at place leading to GE16, I think a lot of us are already intact in terms of what we want, especially from our leaders, from the parties, from the voters. But at the end of the day, our political future is honestly shaped not just by just negotiating among ourselves lah, but our idea of what stability is.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, the numbers at the ballot box is what determines our future, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yes, just doing a little bit of PSA here. Do go out to vote. I know it's a little bit too early, but maybe now is the time for you to start and understand how you would fare, especially going into G16 as a voter. You know, like where you're heading.
And listen to all sides, see what they have to say, not just, I know what you're drawn towards, a lot of us are drawn into one side, but do take perspectives of all sides of the party and see how you can make healthy comparison, right?
Be more politically literate than the last time.
Yeah. But one thing that we do have to accept the fact, though, that coalition politics is now permanent.
It is.
It's not just this year. It's been happening for the past few years.
Yeah.
Only now that we're seeing more of it, right?
Because also we mentioned about no one can earn a simple majority any longer.
Yeah.
Anyway, Thank you so much to our expert guests.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we do appreciate Oe-san. Thank you so much
you.
for being here. Tricia, thank you so much as well.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
So our audience, if you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news reports will be delivered to you. Don't forget to also follow us on our socials. We are everywhere: Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, as well as TikTok. I'm Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Juliana Jalaluddin.
We'll see you next week.
Take care.